That's a cool intro, isn't it? Simple, sort of what, like old school, corny, but it sets the tone. This is a throwback. This game is offering something that you could find back in the 90s and the 2000s and a little bit in the 2010s, but seems to have gone extinct in these dark times of hero shooters and live service sloppa. Today I'm going to be talking about Crow Country, the kind of game where after I finished it, I immediately wished that there was more like it. Crow Country is a low-poly, retro-aesthetic, PS1 style, resource-based survival horror game. Very much in the style of the original Resident Evil, a little bit of Silent Hill. And I'm wondering why I don't get to use all those descriptors together more often. Sure, games come out that like to use many of those buzzwords, but do they ever get as niche and as on point as Crow Country? Nestled into that particular game template. Let's do some thinking. Rhetorical question incoming. Everyone is pretty familiar with the Metroidvania, the boomer shooter, Doom clone. But where are the Silent Evils? The Resident Hills? Maybe not the best genre names. I guess the generic description would be a 2D semi-open world adventure action platformer. But Resi Hill or Silent Evil, that really does hit home the exact type of games I'm going to be talking about. Modern spiritual successors to the classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. I think it's sort of a legitimate question. Where are these games? What are these games? Think about Metroidvanias, the sort of the poster genre for the indie game thing going on. Everyone knows about Hollow Knight, but just from my own experience, there's Blasphemous 1 and 2 and Grime. Then we have Dead Cells, Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night, Ender Lilies, the Ori games, Ultros, Guacamelee, Metroid Dread, if you wanted to include the wraparound. And you can probably find a dozen more sort of well-received games in that genre. I just poked around on Steam for a bit. I'd argue that a lot of those games are built more on the 2010s resurgence with Hollow Knight and then, Metroid and Castlevania. It sort of kicked in the door and proved people want those types of games. But still, that genre is alive. Everyone sort of knows what you're talking about when you name drop the genre. Blasphemous, what's that? Oh, it's sort of like a Metroidvania thing. Okay, yeah. And as for boomer shooters, yeah, there's a billion of those. But why has the indie scene sort of skipped the Silent Evil genre? And perhaps the answer is that the Silent Evil genre, the broad term is survival horror, I guess, underwent a huge shift with Resident Evil 4. A good proportion of the clunkiness inherent to these games, with the fixed camera angles, tank controls, super limited inventories, backtracking, all of that was removed in favor of a cleaner, over-the-shoulder, third-person shooter control scheme with more linear progression. More action and combat was incorporated to fill in all the cracks and sort of holes and stuff. I'd say that the games became more accessible to gamers who preferred FPS like Halo, Call of Duty, actiony games like GTA 3, San Andreas. And that's where the genre ended up being directed. More Resident Evil games were released post-Resident Evil 4 that followed this trend, 5, 6, 7. And the Resident Evil clones in the early 2000s, they never took off really. Things like Dino Crisis, I guess. I'm not really familiar with those. They all became sort of one-note, dead series. We don't really hear much about them besides them being sort of cult classes. And I think a lot of them died on the Dreamcast. Silent Hill just completely fell off the map, really. You can't go too actiony when it's a slow burn, psychological horror trying to say something. Homecoming and Downpour aside, I think those were met with a more of a meh reception. I need to play those someday. But as a whole, the entire genre, it shifted, but most fans were sort of, yeah, this is fine. I enjoy shooting things in a comfortable control scheme. People liked Resident Evil 4 a lot. Games like Dead Space and Dead Space 2 really solidified this specific genre outside of Resident Evil. Tension, action, capital S survival horror. Alan Wake, one of my favorite games, fits in the genre. Also, I think there's a ton of fan base overlap with other resource-based FPS shooters. BioShock comes to mind, hell, System Shock. And this all continued sort of in like the 2010s with the Evil Within, and then there's the New Dooms, the Wolfensteins. You can tread over into the immersive sim gray area with Prey 2018 and the Dishonored series, all those things. Just any game with resource and or inventory management. You have the Resident Evil series itself going strong, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, the remakes, and we sort of have fan base convergence. In a very general sense, the fan base is established from the OG Resident Evil games, Silent Hill games. They have other games that they can play for that survival shooter tension horror itch. They have been placated. They have games to play. Silent Hill fans, maybe they all jumped shipped or they got into indie psychological horror Amnesia and its subsequent wake of games. That's a whole story there. And in the end, I think there just wasn't a demand and impetus for a puristic Resident Hill game. It was the old paradigm. We're in the new one now. On the other hand, from a developer point of view, maybe it's that a 2D Metroidvania or an old school boomer shooter, those are just easier to develop. Resident Hill games, those are technically third-person shooters, sorta, which are more of a AA, AAA project, funding-wise at least. That could have gatekept indie devs. If you're looking at making a game in the survival horror genre, around the early 2010s when indie dev was starting to pick up and proving itself as something that was real, you looked at Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space. Those are sort of the preeminent genre samples for me and probably many others, especially in that time period. Developers looked at those and said, shit, that's going to be hard. Maybe we should just make, a first-person jump scare game instead. Money is unfortunately the most important thing in the universe. Making a Resident Evil 4 clone is going to be expensive and difficult. Now, you can say, let's just go retro-er and make a Resident Evil 1 clone. Low poly, fixed camera angle, pre-rendered backgrounds, people like those. That nostalgic clunkiness, painful inventory management, hours of a confused backtracking. Okay, maybe that's a niche idea. You might make a game that some people genuinely like, but would it be popular? Would it make money? Well, nowadays, I think we might be on the cusp of a breakthrough. There might be a nostalgic market for the slow, atmospheric Resident Hill, Silent Evils, whatever. Signalis was pretty well received. I like the game. Tormented Souls looks good. Low poly PS1 5th generation aesthetics seem to be rising in popularity for some reason. I keep seeing games using those faux VHS filters and post-processing and whatnot. And the entire indie scene as a whole has become so much more developed and polished. And certainly Resident Evil and Silent Hill series, they're not going to go back to their roots. We're going to see how that Silent Hill 2 remake goes. So maybe some nostalgic devs are going to get together and they're going to make a game. And that brings us, finally, Crow Country. This is a review of the game, by the way. I played it on YouTube stream a few weeks back, and felt it warranted a video discussing its merits. It made me realize that I don't see many games like this, specifically like this, very specific. Otherwise they're just gameplay elements that are sort of lifted and placed into much more modernized games. You see a lot of the Resident Evil inventory systems. I learned about this game from the Alpha Beta Gamer YouTube channel. They uploaded a full playthrough of it across 2 videos, I believe. And luckily, I fell asleep for most of them. All I remember is waking up and seeing combat against the Slender Man-looking enemy in the game, and the player threw a grenade at it and it blew up, sending its cylinders and its ball joints physicking across the screen. And I thought to myself, I should probably play this. Full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of the original Resident Evils. Why am I talking about this? I just didn't play them as a kid, so I have no nostalgia for them. I don't hate them. I really appreciate the groundwork they laid down, but I'm from the Resident Evil 4 generation and, subsequent series entries. Fuck tank controls, fuck the 6-slot inventories. Pre-rendered backgrounds, they can be very, very cool. But controlling your character is even more important to me. Of course, by that logic, I should like Resident Evil 6 the best. Possibly I do. Anyway, I have grown more forgiving of this over the years, and I have played the remake of Resident Evil 1. It's a great game. You need a mod that removes the door opening animations. That's a great game. You need to get over the endless backtracking as you try to understand just what the fuck you have to do with only so much inventory space, but it's a great game. I'm not going to excuse the one-way doors, fuck those. It's a case of needing some streamlining, some modernization, and just, different things for a different type of player, me. As for Silent Hill 2, I'm a huge fan of Silent Hill 2. And I've only played a little bit of Silent Hill 1 and 3. I actually don't have a lot of experience with the entire series, besides from that one game. I may really need to go back and do my homework, as it were, play these original classics before I start talking about the genre and lamenting the lack of games in it. Alternatively, I sort of don't give a fuck. Perhaps it's more like this. I've always looking for games that are derivative of Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, Silent Hill 2, other things like this, System Shock. And I'm very willing to forgo action components in exchange for there's something like it existing. And if that shifts it more into Resident Evil 1 space, that's fine. I might not be able to appreciate it in the intended way, but I can still very much enjoy playing it. I think Crow Country is a great game. For what it's trying to emulate, it is nailing it. Resident Evil and Silent Hill they're a little bit more than just a part of the game's makeup. Crow Country is a real spiritual successor to them. Some of the clunk is gone, some still remains. For the nostalgia, for the tension, just the genre needs to provide that specific game feel that you get when you're playing Resident Evil 1 or 2 or Silent Hill 1, Silent Hill 2. But it's done away with some of my personal gripes with Resident Evil 1 without really adding too many problems of its own. So what is this game? It's got zombies in it, right? Where's the mansion? Am I looking for my daughter? In Crow Country, you play as Mara Forrest, Special Agent Mara Forrest, who arrives at the titular Crow Country, an abandoned amusement park. Her goal is simple. She's looking for Edward Crow, the park's owner, who has gone missing. At least that's what the police file you have says. A missing persons report, filed by his daughter, Natalie Crow. And that's all the direction you have. That's all you get. So, armed with a handgun, you shoot off the lock to the gate and you enter the abandoned park. And of course, it's not really abandoned. In fact, it's got a nice population of monsters. Horribly twisted humans slowly staggering at you, groaning and twitching. Ooh, this is fun. Really out of place next to all the kiddie rides and attractions who need to navigate, looking for keys, cranks, and tools to open doors and paths to advance deeper into the park. As you progress, you'll learn things as not as they appear. Blah, 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 mysteries abound, terrible secrets, shocking twists. We don't need to get on those yet. Part of the appeal of the game is the very limited plot in the beginning, which expands as you progress through the game. Many things, they take on a different context. So, I guess for now, to avoid spoilers, we're just going to get technical. Crow Country controls as it needs to. I played the full game with a DualShock controller, PS4 I believe. You have an elevation-locked isometric camera that you can spin 360 degrees around your player character, and you have full stick movement control of your player character. You can walk and sprint to dodge and reposition. Movement feels okay. Nothing wrong there. Combat is engaged by readying your weapon with R1, locking the player character down and entering an aim mode where you can fire and reload your main weapon or switch to a different one. Very classic Resident Evil. I needed some time to get used to it actually, which ended up being about 80% of the game, but on my subsequent playthrough I found it much more natural. Actually aiming is pretty slow, probably glacial compared to any FPS, but it's okay. It's fine. It fits the genre. Almost immediately you get a pistol upgrade that gives your handgun a laser sight, a big red line that you just sort of guide to the monster's important bits. When I say it controls as it needs to, it's not Hades. You're not inputting movement commands on the fly to dodge around and smash enemies. But it's not Resident Evil in the sense of you're just struggling to move your character accurately. That is a relic of a bygone age. I understand why tank controls work in a game with fixed camera positions that change as your character is walking through cramped hallways. I have a lot of experience with the camera shuffle in Silent Hill 2. I can understand people liking that sort of camera system. It can be thematic, you can hide what's around the corners, but I think it is pretty polarizing. Crow Country really avoids all this with its isometric camera system. It's a modernization trade-off. Give the player control of the camera, but keep aiming a little peanut buttery. Combat is exactly what it needs to be. I feel weird saying that there needs to be a little kludge in the aiming controls, but having awkwardness and a little sluggishness in the combat sells the methodical nature of enemy encounters. It's not about quick scopes and QTE dodges. It's a tactical evaluation. It's tension. I need to stun this enemy nearest to me, then take my time to headshot the enemy over there, reposition, then re-engage the first enemy. Much like Resident Evil, getting accurate headshots is key for taking down enemies efficiently. Go look at Dead Space for a really extreme, actiony version of this. Crow Country sticks more closely to Resident Evil 1 than, Dead Space. Threat assessment based on enemy types and their positions, and reactions based on player supplies, proximity to traps. That big guy over there, we're not fighting him until I find some shotgun ammo. Even then, he's so slow I can probably just run around him. This hallway that I need to go back through a dozen times, we're cleaning house here. Oh, hey, look, there's the iconic red explosive barrel. Let's lure a few enemies over to that. Combat in a puristic Silent Hill game is about what you gain versus what you can lose. Ammo is money, you can spend it, ideally in the most efficient way possible. Enemies are objects that you can dodge around until you feel like you can safely afford to dispatch them. Some enemies require, immediate response. Others will be left alive for the entire game, and then at that point they're just platforming hazards. As the game progresses, previously cleared areas will be repopulated by new and old enemy types, requiring a reassessment. Do I want to clean out this area again? Do I need to go back through here? Are the enemies here more dangerous now? Can I leave them alive? There's always that constant question, how are my resources doing? What can I afford to do? Honestly, Crow Country is not a difficult game. On my initial playthrough, I had no deaths, despite my numerous mistakes. Healing is plentiful, enemies are rather slow, and they're only really able to hurt you when you mess up trying to run around them, or you decide to purposely engage them and you sort of mess up. Some rooms require combat just to make puzzle solving easier, and others are those intersections you'll travel frequently. Ammunition is plenty enough, so I felt really okay clearing many rooms I felt I needed to. Interestingly, every weapon aside from your handgun can be skipped or even missed. I guess the game considered these weapons, the shotgun, flamethrower, and magnum, just to be secrets that are unlocked by just, optional puzzle solving. I think the shotgun might actually not be that, but whatever. I sort of like that. Enemy spawns do get denser as the game progresses, and more powerful enemies do appear, but I felt like I didn't need more powerful weapons. Large enemies and groups could be pretty much dealt with either by dodging them, ignoring them, or using the throwable grenade items that were pretty common, almost too common. And any stragglers from any explosion could just be easily dispatched with the handgun. The shotgun is incredibly powerful, and I felt ammo was super common for it. Unlocking the shotgun requires a small shooting challenge that can be reached fairly quickly, but I stupidly didn't realize what I needed to do to get it. So I had this big surplus of shotgun ammo for the majority of the game. When I did get it, I felt enormously powerful. My handgun ammo to that point was being strained a little bit, but being finally able to access my backlog of shotgun ammo really encouraged me to clear most rooms, even if I felt like they didn't need it. Its usefulness made it feel like a second, strictly better handgun. The Magnum is like any Resident Evil Magnum, extremely limited ammo, completely trivializes bosses. I didn't use the flamethrower that much in combat, so not much to say there. It's actually used in like one or two puzzles requiring fire. Sort of was saving most of the ammo for that in case there was more. There weren't. There are a few bosses in the game, but they're all technically optional. Or I should say, if you don't want to fight them or can't fight them, you can just run away, or I think for most of them, you need to do a small puzzle in that room to escape. I don't know if they stay there for the rest of the game, but it's an interesting safeguard against soft-locking yourself, since there's strangely no melee weapon in the game. You can unlock one as a bonus reward, but that's, again, a bonus reward. Personally, I think this weapon arrangement could have been more interesting if there was more benefit to skipping weapons, but surprisingly, there's not really an inventory system in Crow Country a la Resident Evil 1. All weapons and key items can be picked up and held no problem, with the only limitation being that you are capped at how much ammo you can carry for each ammo type. If you're at max, you can't pick up anymore, and the same is true for health items and grenades. The severely limited inventory design of Resident Evil 1 is clunky, restrictive, but it's a recognizable feature of those games, one. But it challenges the player to decide on what they need to carry to survive. For example, if you think you can make it on just a handgun and some backup ammo, then you have the inventory space to carry more items or key items. If you think you need to carry around the shotgun as well, there's hunters about or whatever, some cheap-ass enemy, or if the shotgun is a multi-slot inventory item, You do that trade-off where you have a lot more firepower and abilities to survive, but you have very little inventory space, which can punish you if you need to pick up like 3 keys on your way to your next objective. Crow Country not playing around with this inventory system is surprising to me, given its deep roots in the genre. I can't say it's for better or for worse. Mindlessly inserting gameplay features isn't the best way to build a game. A restrictive inventory system is basically padding if you're not clear on what items you need where, so you need to backtrack constantly just trying to figure out what to do. But it serves as an overarching skill curve. It's a reason to replay, built-in speedrunning. On repeat playthroughs of the game, knowing what to do will greatly improve your clear times. Better clear times equal better ranks and thus better rewards, if those exist in the game. However, your ending rank in Crow Country has no time to clear components, so I suppose a restrictive inventory system would just serve to limit player power, thus the player would need to make choices on how they want to play. You think Resident Evil or Dead Space, you can't carry and maintain every weapon in those games, so you have to make choices on which ones you want to use for that particular playthrough. I suppose the system was just forgone because it wasn't needed. What purpose does this have being in the game? For example, Silent Hill. Does Silent Hill really need it? Combat in those games is more of just a component of the game feel. The player is fighting and surviving against something larger, more overarching, more nebulous, with an end goal of, that they're trying to reach. James Sutherland is trying to find his wife Mary, and there's a vagina monster in the way. And then at the end of the game, she's the vagina monster. What a twist. Chris and Jill are trying to survive and escape the Spencer Mansion. It's very subtle and nuanced, and I'm getting far more pretentious than necessary. But there's a difference between surviving a situation and journeying to a destination. If the player is supposed to proceed along a linear path, then putting supplies that they need off that path can result in a soft lock situation if they choose not to explore. If the player is supposed to navigate a static, dense environment, backtracking, getting real deep and searching through everything, then encourage them to explore and gather. Combat becomes more that you find ammo in one room and you spend it on a monster in another. And then over time the game will slowly unravel itself into that linear path on repeat playthroughs. But I'm talking about initial playthroughs here. Crow Country is sort of in between this. There is no obvious linear path at the beginning, but there also is no strict ammo to enemy assignment. I guess simply put, it's a much more forgiving and easy game because the game doesn't care how much player skill is required in combat. Most of the difficulty in Crow Country comes from the classic what the fuck do I actually do wandering around gameplay. You spend a lot of time looking at employee notes, trying to track down tools and keys and codes to advance into different areas or unlock some convoluted lock or puzzle. There's a lot of backtracking, which means there's a lot of value in clearing enemies. Otherwise, you'll need to dodge and weave every time you pass through a dangerous area, which risks damage. As a wrinkle, there's a lot of traps scattered around, bear traps, poison traps, fake item pickups that are actually bombs. I like these because it adds more risk to dodging around slow enemies. If you're not carefully planning your movements, paying attention, you're going to lose health from stepping on a bear trap or something, even if you manage to dodge the monsters. I quickly learned that items placed right out in the open are not to be trusted until you can take the time to examine them for the trademark odd markings of the disguised bombs. I believe these traps repopulate at certain points in the game, so vigilance is always required. These traps can also be used on enemies. Enemies can be lured over bear traps or hanging chandelier traps to be shot to crush them. Explosive barrels can be shot. Breaker boxes can be shot for an electrical discharge explosions. Enemies can be dispatched with great efficiency like this. The game is more or less trying to whittle you down. There's no dangerous, fast enemy that will just fuck you up and skill check you. But you will take more damage just trying to walk around the same slow zombie you just refuse to clear as you try to figure out how to progress. Overall, the game's difficulty relies on how well the player is at managing their supplies. You can afford to take a few hits and to shoot a few enemies, but if you engage too much, you'll find that ammo and healing becomes in short supply. There were a few points in my playthrough where I found myself avoiding combat because I didn't have the ammo to spare. but I was in no way like blocked because of it. My gameplay style just changed. What did block me were some of the puzzles, a lot of which are these sort of like find the key puzzles, solve the puzzle for the key sort of thing. You'll be directed via notes to areas that will have some key item, but typically you'll need some other item to even access it. And then you'll need to solve some puzzle to unlock it, which will sometimes require you to find some information in a note that's in some random location. This is fine. Crow Country, the amusement park, isn't a large area, so poking around will eventually net you the information you need, and it's fun to explore and sort of figure out what's going on. Somewhat annoyingly, though, notes you find aren't copied to a journal. There are notebooks in these preset locations that contain all the employee notes that you've seen during your exploration, your journey adventure. I'm not sure of the reasoning behind this, not having a journal. Backtracking to read a note that you found like an hour ago to try to solve a puzzle is a little annoying. There is an order in which you need to find everything to do everything, and the difficulty really is figuring out what puzzle you can actually do at any given moment. Relegating sort of the vital information to a few static locations just seems to punish the player for not memorizing everything that they come across. So if they just forget something, it's, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of wandering around until you remember the info that you forgot. The puzzles themselves have a good range of needing some critical thinking, observation, memory skills. Some of them do lend themselves to being very obtuse, and I think there's always a chance to just completely miss what a puzzle is. For example, going back, I needed to shoot a certain score at an arcade light gun game or whatever to unlock the shotgun. That was easy enough to surmise, and it's like, okay, I need to hit 21 points exactly. But I got heavily focused on thinking that I needed to repair the arcade game to play it. The plastic little shotgun toy that you use, there was another one in another room. Do I need that? How do I do this? What's happening? And then it just dawned upon me, I can just use my handgun. It's like the Dead Space thing. Other than a few standouts like that, most of the puzzles in the game were very straightforward enough to figure out with some thought, with some engagement on the player, which is fun. And if you get truly stumped, there are a few fortune teller booths around the park that will dispense hints sort of to your next objective, up to 10 times. Which, after that, I guess you'll just resort to Google or a Steam guide. I enjoyed this system. It allows an in-game solution to being stuck rather than having to break your immersion to go look up something online. Having to cheat isn't a bit fun, it's a bit frustrating, but I think this is a decent compromise. I used a few early on, and they're cryptic enough to not flat out give you an answer, just sort of nudge you in the right direction so you can sort of have your own eureka moments. I'm going to quickly talk about the graphics, which are they're reminiscent of the 5th generation graphics, PS1, Nintendo 64. Big, simple, geometric shapes, polygons combined into character models, scenery, props, whatever. Ironically, it reminds me a lot more of Final Fantasy than anything Resident Evil. I guess this is partly due to the isometric perspective that you're given. I know there's some sources online that can really go into the graphical art styles of PS1 games. There's definitely a look to them because the Nintendo 64 games I played back in the day, they had a look to them, and there's sort of a difference there. The hardware is probably having some influence on this, though I'm sure there's also the in-house graphical styles of certain companies that also play a huge part. And I can't really speak much more on this than that. I'm at my limit. But overall, there's definitely a resurgence of that older 3D style. Pseudo Regalia, Signalis, Lunacid, and then you get to all the stuff like Iron Lung and all those horror games. I don't know if stuff like Lethal Company counts. That may just be a case of I'm not the best at 3D modeling and it's low poly with some filters on it, and depending on what filters, that crunch can lean towards a very retro look. Crow Country is definitely doing that with its heavy, 144p filter that it has on everything. Everything in game is probably like a nice smooth model, it's just that it gets all clunked up and pixel bled into looking probably a lot better than it would otherwise. I'd really like to see screenshots of the game without that filter. I don't know what resurrected this specific aesthetic, copycats, easier skill curves, or whatever. But it's nice. It's something different than like pixel art or the hand-drawn art that is commonly associated with indie games. And it's definitely 100% better than the asset store look that some games can have, though that's awful. I hate that. This Crow Country, solidly charming. It's pretty unique. It's not like a low res like dithered PS1 characters either. They're all like little Lego Playmobil people that they're sort of cute. This all clashes heavily with the actual story of the game, and not even just horror monsters. Crow Country is a game about like money laundering, cover-ups, human experiments, exploitation, suicide, death, genocide maybe? I don't know. All with these little Playmobil people. And the game just, it wears that on its sleeve, confident that it can just tell the story it wants to. And it does. If Final Fantasy VII can tell a serious story with little chibi characters, why not Crow Country? Crow Country, for me, told its story in perfect way. I guess for me, it's perfect. You think of the iceberg analogy. You have an initial premise, sure, you can see that. But after getting past the surface, you realize there's depth to all of this that really changes what you initially saw. So, spoiler warning, possibly skip to the timestamp on screen if I decide to do that. If not, just go play the game. It's great. Trust me. You can just leave it right there, end of video. But to get into it, as I said before, Mara Forrest is trying to find Edward Crow at the old Crow Country amusement park. That is it. That's the premise that you're presented with at the beginning of the game. There's a short opening cutscene that explains that the player avatar is named Mara and she's a special agent. 4 or 5 lines of dialogue while the camera circle pans the driving car, and then you're just playing the game. You don't even have to interact with the file on the hood of your card that explains why you're even here. Straight to the gameplay, walking around, reading some cryptic notes. Wow, that's a lot of blood smears on the wall. Oh, that's a fucked up monster. And then you realize that you don't have enough ammo. We have a Resident Evil situation here. Has our STARS member bitten off more than she can chew? Well, it turns out the question is wrong. You're not a STARS member, special agent, firearms expert. You're just a girl. And this fact slowly materializes as you play the game. You begin to realize it yourself as the player. There are a few NPCs in the park to deliver the story, as Mara's not going to give you any answers. Their interactions with you cast Mara as a particularly young for a special agent, and they seemed pretty unconvinced. Sure, the gun you have is quite real, but special agent? Nah, what are you really here for, Mara? And then the player asks themselves that. But the question seems reluctant for an answer. Mara is silent on the issue. Actually, she doesn't show her true hand until the very end of the game, revealing her identity to be blank. Huh, okay, that makes sense. Thought you were dead. Dramatic reveals aside, I enjoyed how tight-lipped Crow Country was with its plot. You spend a lot of the game encountering lone pieces of information, notes, records, environments, that slowly begin to link together into a clearer picture of the backstory behind Crow Country Amusement Park. Okay, here's an example. The enigmatic Edward Crow was the mysteriously wealthy individual who founded and funded Crow Country Amusement Park. Well, actually, Edward Crow, he's sort of involved in Brazilian gold mines. Okay, I guess that's where he got his money from. Interesting. They're shipping the raw ore to Crow Country, which is weird. I guess they're refining it on site. Why would they do that at an amusement park, at a theme park? Actually, in this refinery room, they seem to be taking gold bars, crushing them up, mixing them with Brazilian soil and rock to make fake ore, and shipping it back? Huh, why are they doing that? These notes also imply that all the gold is collected on site from an underground facility area? Beneath the park? What is that? Harvested from something called the roots? What are those? They grow out of the pool? What's that? And in this underground facility, you can see pure gold rods being extracted from these weird green roots. These strange growing stalks of some material that have a pure gold core. Massive amounts of it. Too much to even sell. All completely unnatural, much like the monsters that roam the grounds. So it's all related, isn't it? It has to be. Edward found some unnatural source of gold, so much that he needs to set up a fake mine in Brazil to launder it all and make it look like he's producing it naturally. But now there's monsters coming up from the pools. I guess they fucked up his plans. Why? Why is all of this happening? This is the general format of the story. Every few minutes, you find another piece of information that widens the understanding you have of the events leading to the now, the actual game. That is called investment. I wanted to read more of the records, talk to more of the NPCs. Everything was like it was becoming clearer. Ultimately, I wanted to find Crow to get that final piece in the center, that final scrap of information to tie everything together. Crow Country feels very based in reality. There's no interpretation of events or metaphor, Silent Hill style. The monsters don't represent Mara's repressed sexuality or anything like that. Everything is happening for a reason. It's just that the instigating factor of everything, the roots, the pools, the mutants, are all completely unexplained until the very end. It becomes apparent as you play that we're building towards this. You get a little scrap of history here and there, but that big void at the beginning is always blank. At a point, I just accepted that only Crow would have the answers I needed. I know you're scam, but what the fuck is actually going on? How is Mara connected to all of this? I know she's not a cop, but why is she even here? This is an excellent way to convey a mystery story. We start at a point C, and then we slowly pick away like an archaeological dig. And we find a point F over here, and a point D there, and there's elemental P back there. Everything carefully arranged so that the player has some definable amount of story knowledge at any given point of the game. And at the end, you pretty much get the whole story, the whole history. And yet there's these massive holes. Who is Mara? What are the mutants? What are the roots? What is the pool? What is Crow doing at the center of all this? Well, I'm not going to answer that. The full story is interesting enough to demand those answers be only given to those brave enough to play a video game for a few hours. Trust me, you'll enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed Crow Country. Mojo's seal of approval, the survival horror badge, the Resi 1 award for most spiritual successor to ever spiritually succeed. Obviously, if you're interested in playing the game, go buy it. It's $20 as of this video, full price. If you want more information, I know I haven't shown any gameplay footage because that's not my style. I'm not a video editor. You can go look at my stream replay here on YouTube. You can go look up the Steam trailer. You can pretty much decide quickly if this game is up your alley. Playtime for me was about 6 hours, but I can imagine beating this game easily under 3 hours for a newbie or something. A first time playthrough. It's a nice weekend game, possibly even a weekday game. If you're looking for numbers, easily a consistent 7 out of 10 for the gameplay, provided this is your type of game. It is somewhat too simple, and I did find myself thinking maybe a few extra gameplay layers would be nice. Work in an inventory system, maybe have a little bit more content here and there. It goes up to possibly a 9 out of 10 if you really dig the aesthetic and story. It goes up to there. I hold the latter opinion, with a few caveats here and there. It can be a very short game for fast players. There's a little replay value. There's a hard mode that was added as an update, but I feel that just puts it in line with the standard difficulty for Resident Evil 1. You can play through again if you want to. There's not many unlockables. Clear ranks are based on lives used, secrets found, hints used, and healing used. I do not know what lives used actually means. If it's a death counter or what. I intentionally killed myself in the game, and it just gave me the game over screen and allowed me to reload from a last save. Secrets found is obvious. There are 15 secrets in the game. They're marked on your map if you find the secrets map. These are additional weapons, weapon upgrades, magnum ammo, so finding them is pretty helpful unless you just don't have the corresponding weapon. Hints used is how many times you asked for a hint from the fortune teller. A small medkit or antidote is 1 healing, and a large medkit is 2 healing, I think I read somewhere. So you need to get under 10 for the S rank, which might be challenging. When I replayed on hard difficulty, I reached about 8 or 9, maybe even over 10 by the halfway point of the game. Again, not a deep, difficult game for most people, but probably a really pleasurable one for people who are a fan of this genre. As for the developers, briefly we'll mention them at the end here. SFB Games, an acronym that is a callback to their previous name, the Super Flash Bros. I am not familiar with them, but apparently they were super early Newgrounds Flash guys and game makers. I think people will recognize them from there, it's possible. They did something like the Another Day series or something like that. I'm not quite sure. I remember seeing something like it way back in 2006 or whatever when I was an amoeba. And when I was doing this research now, I saw that again. I'm like, oh, they made that. That's interesting. I guess from there, they went on to make games for Newgrounds, Armor Games, Apple, Nintendo. Regrettably, I think Crow Country is a bit of an aberration for them in terms of their development history. There's nothing really else like it in their library. They seem to be well known for the Detective Grimoire series, which has 2 to 3 installments, and they've also made tons of Flash and mobile games. They got a pretty long backlog of history. I won't lie, I'm not terribly interested in any of that, but I will say that Crow Country is a damn fine game. I would be extremely proud if I had made it, and if they ever come back with anything like this, it'll be a day one purchase, day one Kickstarter, whatever they want. I will follow along happily. Anyways, there should be some Crow Country fan art on screen. I wonder how it looks. I haven't even started on any thumbnails yet. Maybe it looks awesome, hopefully. There's a chance I will try to do something different on this one. Possibly. I don't know yet. One of these days I'll just try to use gameplay footage when I'm making these videos. These are video essays anyway, but then it wouldn't be MOJODraws. It'd be Mojo Reviews. Mojo's top 10 clickbait Pokemon thumbnails. That reminds me, I will point out that Elaine clearly says she's not 18 yet, so that severely limits what I, the cum-brain degenerate smut artist, can do. But I guess I'll go figure that out now. Until next time I find a game I like or hate, I'll see you then. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.